This is the first of 4 videos on early modern philosophy. These are intended for students who are taking Modern Philosophy 2 on Kant and Hegel, who may not have studied early modern philosophy yet in Modern Philosophy 1. Students who have taken Modern 1, especially if they didn't take it last semester, may find these videos useful as a review. And what I'm seeking to do here is to highlight those aspects of early modern philosophy that are most relevant for studying Kant and Hegel. So there's going to be 4 of these videos. The first video, this one, we're going to talk about Bacon, Pascal, and Hobbes. The second video talks about Descartes, Malebranche, and Spinoza. The third video is on Leibniz and Wolff. And the fourth video, finally, is on Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. So let's begin to talk about what early modern philosophy is characterized by. So there are these 2 main schools in early modern philosophy that are usually called rationalism and empiricism. So I'll actually start with empiricism. Empiricism involves the claim that all of our knowledge comes to us from experience. And usually an empiricist means sense experience, outer experience, not inner experience, although there's some debate about this within empiricism. Kant will distinguish inner and outer experience and talk about both of them as experience. The second main school is rationalism, coming from the Latin term ratio. And this is the position that some human knowledge can be gained by pure reason independently of any experience. Notice that the distinction is not between saying that all knowledge comes to us from experience or that no knowledge comes to us through experience. That's not the distinction. Rationalism doesn't claim that all of our knowledge comes to us through reason, only that there is some of our knowledge that comes to us through reason alone, and empiricism denies that claim. Now, the modern period is characterized by a break with the scholastic tradition, whose central figure was Thomas Aquinas. So it was a break from the philosophy that was, as Thomas said, the handmaiden of theology. So the purpose, according to Thomas, of philosophy was to serve theology and faith. Now, strictly speaking, the Renaissance accomplished the break with scholasticism, but the early modern figures are carrying out the implications of this break. The most important moment for the Renaissance in philosophy is a growing retrieval and revival of the philosophy of Plato, because scholasticism was pervaded by Aristotelianism. So this revival of Plato in the Renaissance period is seen then by the Renaissance thinkers as an alternative to the Aristotelian character of Thomistic philosophy. Now, the modern period in philosophy is usually taken to begin with Francis Bacon. Don't confuse him with Roger Bacon. And by the way, there's a handout that goes along with these videos. It's on Brightspace. It's called Early Modern Names and Dates. So you'll be able to see how these names are spelled. So that, for instance, you can look them up on something like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online, which I highly recommend to get more information about them. I also give on that handout the dates. So Francis Bacon carries out a break with Aristotle by replacing Aristotle's works on logic with a new logic of his own. So Aristotle's works on logic are typically called the Organon, and Bacon writes a book called the New Organon, which was a systematic presentation of what we now call the scientific method, the experimental inductive method, which Bacon opposed to Aristotle's deductive method of reasoning. Now, it's debatable, if you've taken ancient philosophy, whether Aristotle should be called a deductivist. Bacon is working from Aristotle's syllogistic logic, but for instance, if you look at Aristotle's biological works, for instance, they show a strong inductive streak. So it's likely that Bacon misunderstood Aristotle. Bacon wanted to introduce this scientific method into philosophy. He wanted philosophy to be inductive. So he should probably be classified as an empiricist, strictly speaking, although in another sense Bacon predates the empiricism-rationalism split. Now, all modern philosophers, in some sense or other, want to introduce either a natural science method into philosophy or a mathematical method into philosophy. You could say that modern philosophy is characterized by a love affair with science and math. Blaise Pascal, look at the handout for the name and date. Blaise Pascal is the one great exception. So Pascal says the heart has reasons that reason knows nothing about. So Pascal doesn't fit neatly into the empiricism-rationalism split because he believes math and science are not the proper models for philosophical reasoning. So Pascal is sometimes called an irrationalist, but this designation really begs the question because it assumes that reason must be mathematical or natural scientific. But Pascal wants to give place to feeling, to heart, to leaps of faith, and not necessarily only restrict knowledge to mathematics, to mathematical or natural scientific reasoning. Now, Pascal is himself a mathematician, so you might think that he should have the same love affair with mathematics that many other modern philosophers do. He does in a way, but most modern philosophers who want to push this idea that philosophy should be more mathematical are talking about mathematics in terms of geometry, algebra, arithmetic, these traditional disciplines that are really based back in ancient Greek times and to some extent predate the ancient Greek times in Egypt. Okay? But Pascal is working with a newer mathematics that deals with probability and statistics, right? So he wants to use the methods of probability and statistics to justify religious belief. Okay. So he could be an interesting figure for some of you who are struggling with questions of religious belief, or also with the question how much of our lives should be dictated by reason and how much should be dictated by heart, or however you want to characterize the aspects of human nature that are and human experience that are apart from reason. Let's go back to Bacon. Bacon believed that science had the job of making human beings, quote, the masters and possessors of nature. And the way we do that is through technology, of course. The purpose of the scientific method for Bacon is to make us masters and possessors of nature through technology. The scientific method can apply not only to outer nature, to things like physics, astronomy, biology, and so forth. It can also apply to matters of the human soul in psychology. There can be a science of psychology. Now, Bacon, interestingly, critiqued 4 different types of prejudices, and he called prejudices idols, like, images of the gods that people worship, of false gods. So 4 types of prejudice These are idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, and idols of the theater. Let's talk about, I'll just give you a brief characterization of each one of those. Idols of the tribe for Bacon are illusions or delusions, mistakes of reasoning that are due to characteristics of humanity that belong to us as an animal species. Idols of the cave are due to subjective characteristics of individuals. So my idols of the cave might be different from yours. Idols of the marketplace are due to the influence of language on our thinking. So these would be the ways in which different cultures may think differently because of possessing different languages. And then fourth, there are idols of the theater, which have to do with the influence of tradition or culture on our thinking. And those are four different ways that reason can go wrong by accepting, worshiping, in a sense, one of those four types of idols. Now, Bacon rejects as worthless all non-empirical objects. That is, all objects of knowledge that we cannot get through our senses. Bacon says those are meaningless, including mathematical objects are meaningless because we cannot perceive the perfect triangle, therefore there is no such thing. It doesn't make any sense to talk about triangles and squares, just to talk about roughly triangular objects or roughly circular objects. Along with that, because of course God is a non-empirical object of knowledge to whatever extent God is an object of knowledge. Well, for Bacon, God is not an object of knowledge at all. Theology is a matter of faith, not reason. We should show how much we love God by believing in mystical dogmas that go beyond the influence of reason. For Francis Bacon, not for Jeffrey Wilson necessarily. So to make the transition from Bacon to Hobbes, Hobbes carried through Bacon's proposal that scientific method should be applied to philosophy. And he did it. He completely Hobbes completely cut off theology from philosophy. Hobbes coined the phrase, knowledge is power. Michel Foucault and the whole feminist movement in philosophy makes a great deal out of it. They don't necessarily acknowledge the fact that the expression knowledge is power originally comes from Hobbes. All objects of experience for Hobbes are appearances either of the outer world or of the inner world. All of our outer world objects are processes of motion. They obey mechanical, physical laws that are developed mathematically. They're all due to the movement and interaction of material atoms. All the inner processes of the soul are also physiological, meaning that these movements of the soul, the inner processes of human experience, come from movements of invisible atoms. Okay, so inner experience is governed by the same laws as outer experience. You have these atoms that are interacting with one another. They're visible in the case of the outer world. They're invisible in the case of the inner world. But in either case, the interaction of the atoms is what produces our experience. Hobbes is known especially for his political philosophy, which you find in his book Leviathan, where he talks about what it means for human beings to be in the state of nature and what it means for us to depart from the state of nature. And Hobbes talks about the social contract before Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks about the social contract. So if you're interested in political philosophy and someone tells you that Rousseau came up with the first notion of a social contract, you can correct them and say, no, that was in fact Thomas Hobbes. So that's the end of the first video. The second video is going to treat Descartes, Malebranche, and Spinoza.